of our speakers are icons and visionaries in the field of energy and sustainability. Jennifer's organization, LanzaTech, is a company that's globally renowned for its groundbreaking work in sustainable fuels. She's always been a friend of the firm, and we're very lucky to have her here with us today. We also have Simon Virley, who is a foremost thinker, whose expertise and leadership have made quite a significant impact in the industry, while he helps deliver strategic solutions to our clients world over. So please join me in extending a warm welcome to both of them on stage.
Right, good morning. Thanks, Superba, for that intro. So I'm Simon Virley. I'm Vice Chair and Head of Energy for KPMG in the UK, and delighted to be joined by Dr. Jennifer Holmgren, from CEO of LanzaTech. We've been talking about the theme of this conference, which is growing with less. And surely there's no better CEO to tell us about how to do that than LanzaTech CEO, who are involved in sustainable energy innovation. And Jennifer, I'm going to start. You're a multiple award winner. I won't go through all of the many awards you've enjoyed over the years, including, I know, the Earthshot Prize finalist last year and multiple author of scientific journals. But tell us a bit about LanzaTech, about what LanzaTech does and how you're helping with the sustainable energy innovation journey.
So what LanzaTech does is essentially we're creating a circular carbon economy. You saw Anish show a lot of waste resources, trash, agri-residues, CO2. These are all carbon-rich residues from which everything we use in our daily lives can be made. We believe there's enough carbon above ground to make all of the products we use. So then the question is, how do we do it? How are we creating what we call a post-pollution future? What we do is we have a fermentation process which uses gases, not sugar. So a gas at a steel mill, a gas at a refinery, municipal solid waste that has been gasified, all these things can be converted to ethanol, and then that ethanol is converted to sustainable aviation fuel and to materials. And that's essentially what we do. And again, we have to transition from a linear economy that is extractive to a circular economy. That's how we can grow with less. We get more out of every carbon atom.
Sounds absolutely fascinating, Jennifer. So, yeah, I know you were at New York Climate Week recently because I've been stalking you on LinkedIn. Tell us about how you scale up this energy innovation. You know, how do you go from the kind of breakthrough technologies that you're talking about there to something that can be mass produced at scale and is affordable?
Well, it takes time and it takes money. And I want to emphasize that because I want to make sure that we don't just all believe in magical unicorns that are going to, you know, create a different future for us. LanzaTech has been around for 18 years and we've raised over $500 million. That's how we got to where we are today. That's how we got to already 4 commercial facilities running and 2 more that will be running by the end of this year. I think there's a couple of things that are super important if you talk about scaling innovation. One is we have to be able to feed the pipeline, which we do already today by funding new ideas, but we also have to be willing to help finance scale up. The problem is what we call crossing the valley of death. When you're developing a new technology, a new process technology, everything you build to prove out your technology is bigger, right? That's more steel. So you first do it in the lab, that's not expensive. Then you do a pilot, then you do a demo, and then you do your first commercial. By then you're talking $50 to $100 million per plant. So to build that first one requires a lot of financing. And you heard about risk premiums. You hear about the fact that the first of a kind is always risky enough that the cost of capital is really, really high. And sometimes you just can't afford that. So it becomes really important for governments to support scale-up. We are starting to see that happening. We're starting to see a transition from financing early-stage ideas to helping scale. In the United States, we have the IRA, the infrastructure funding. In India, we have VGF, Viability Gap funding. In Europe, we have the Innovation Fund. So we're starting to see people say, okay, we need to help build the first commercial, not just get a lot of new ideas into the pipeline. That's a big, big deal.
Some challenge from my KPMG colleagues in the room there to get through that, help financing structures to get through the valley of death. Now you've got multiple industry partnerships, haven't you, at LanzaTech? So the ones I've read about are Gale, Dow, Total, L'Oreal. Tell us about those partnerships and which of those are you most excited about in terms of their potential?
Well, that's like saying, who's my favorite husband? I don't have one. Let me show you some examples because I think this is actually important. Our partnerships are at commercial scale. We've been working here in India with Indian Oil, building a plant taking waste gases at their refinery, and converting them to ethanol. We've worked with Indian Glycol, taking ethanol and converting it to surfactants that end up in Dow products, Dow chemical products. But I have real examples of a couple of things. See how I can use one hand or two. This is a pair of running shorts made by Lululemon. The polyester in this was made from a waste steel mill gas. Okay. What else do I have in my bag? Pair of a shirt from Adidas. This is their Melbourne collection. And again, this was made from a waste steel mill gas. And one which is not my favorite, but is cool, especially cool. And I'll tell you why. This is high-end Gucci perfume. The ethanol was made from a steel mill gas. Now, why does that matter? The reason I find this one particularly interesting is because when we first started making ethanol from a steel mill gas, who would have ever thought that somebody would put it next to their skin, right? Pollution, this was pollution. This was gonna be particulate emissions in China, and instead, it's a perfume. And I do, you know, we have partnership with Zara, et cetera, but the point is, just stop and think for a second. This is made from pollution. This is made from something that was going to be thrown away. Imagine that circular economy. Imagine that future where instead of waste carbon, we make products in a circular economy. And if you'll let me one more minute, you know, this is how nature behaves. Nature wastes nothing. Even when a bud falls from a tree, it becomes the next tree. And if it can't become the next tree, it becomes fertilizer for that tree. We have learned to waste. And that's why we cannot get as much as we can from all of our resources. And that's why Anish is right. That's why KPMG is right. We need to learn to get more out of everything so we can grow, so we can create equity, so that everybody can have growth and the things they need without continuing to just throw resources away.
I love that. Nature wastes nothing. I think that's a really good reminder of what we need to do. And I love the real-life examples of those sustainable products. Tell us about the costs, though, about the affordability, and about how much, government funding you mentioned that has helped develop some of these. Can we make these affordably? Can we make these at a reasonable price?
Well, right now they're not at a reasonable price in terms of, like, for example, our polyester, the polyester we make. But our partners like Adidas, Lululemon, Zara, they have absorbed the cost, because the price of the polyester that we're providing is only a small part of the price of the finished good. Because of the fact that there is such products, they've chosen to take that on. They can't do that for every product and every product line, but they can do that for enough that it pulls the technology, allows us to build more, allows us to do more, and reduce the cost. How do we get to cost competitive with fossil? Don't hold your breath, okay? I don't know a path to become truly competitive with fossil carbon, which is been around for 100 years, all these products, which is subsidized as well. However, if we can talk about a 20 or 30% premium, I can imagine getting there. And I do it for two ways. One is we do it by building more plants, right? The more you build, the cheaper each of them gets. You get down the cost curve. So who are my favorite partners? All the ones that were willing to build the first one, which allows me to build the cheaper second one. So Indian Oil, for example, building the first refinery off gas. Zara taking on the first polyester. But the other thing that will make all of this cheaper is integrated supply chains. We're making ethanol in China, but we're converting it to MEG, the precursor for polyester, here in India with Indian glycol. So if I can do all of that in one country, I'm not moving ethanol around, and that will reduce the cost. So there are elements of the supply chain that, as we build more, will also make all of these things cheaper and more accessible.
So presumably, in terms of policy and regulatory frameworks, you'd be looking for governments to both price those externalities, but also to remove the subsidies for fossil fuels over time that would help with the cost comparisons. Would those be on your shopping list?
Those would be on my shopping list. That's absolutely right. And like I said, support for scale-up of new technologies.
Now, one of the most exciting areas I've seen LanzaTech being involved in is sustainable aviation fuels. And it's one of the great hard sectors that we all deal with. A lot of us have flown around the world here to get here to New Delhi. Tell us about your initiatives on sustainable aviation fuels and the progress you're making there.
Absolutely. So what we've done and what we started doing with the Department of Energy in the United States and Pacific Northwest National Lab is we developed the technology to take ethanol to jet fuel. And the reason we did that is because of the fact that ethanol, I've already told you all the ways we can make ethanol from waste, but also because ethanol is a great product made from different resources across the world. So if you imagine a future where people are using their own local resources to make what they need, then ethanol produced from your country's local resources is a great opportunity. And sustainable aviation fuel, let's face it, you need energy density. You need hydrocarbons to get across the Atlantic, to get across the Pacific, and to take an airplane with 300 people that distance. And so the conversion of ethanol through to a hydrocarbon, an isomerized hydrocarbon that can power an airplane, we believe is quite important. We believe hydrocarbons will be very important and sustainable in creating a sustainable aviation future. And just to look at numbers, we use 100 billion gallons of aviation fuel today, and today there's only 20 to 30 million gallons of sustainable aviation fuel. So the gap is massive, but it is an industry that is pulling. You know, if you look at Heathrow Airport, if you talk to airlines, including airlines here in India, they're all committing to flying 10% of all their fuel use on sustainable aviation fuel. So we've got a massive gap between what we have today and in 2030. So we've got a lot of plants to build. So I believe it's an important sector. I believe the end users are interested. Countries are committed. So it's a great opportunity to grow and reduce the cost.
Yeah, the UK's just announced a target, as you say, 10% of sustainable aviation fuels by 2030. So there's an awful lot of supply needed to meet that target, certainly. What about industry, heavy industry and chemicals? You've mentioned some of the areas, but how optimistic are you we can find ways to decarbonize heavy industry with some of these new techniques you're pioneering?
Well, so one of the things I like about what we do is we're trying to solve two problems at the same time. This is all made from steel mill gas, right? So a steel mill emission, so we're decarbonizing the steel mill, and then at the same time we're making products that would normally come from fresh fossil. So we do decarbonize at both ends, and I think that's quite important. I'm seeing a lot of work by others on cement, decarbonizing cement industry. So I think there are a lot of people working on the heavy industries. I think you know that Secretary Kerry is leading a group called the First Movers Coalition. The First Movers Coalition is a group of heavy industry players who are committed to purchasing products in aviation and steel, etc., to try to pull those technologies along. And I would say one final thing. You used the word optimism. I am not just optimistic. This is what we have to do. This is what we will do, right? Not just LanzaTech, but everybody that's working on this, because we don't have a choice but to decarbonize heavy industry.
One of the other themes yesterday we were discussing was the just energy transition, and how do we make this fair in terms of the transition for all countries, different geographies, different countries at different stages of their development. How do you approach that from a LanzaTech point of view? How do you approach the just transition?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing I would say is we're actually not going to solve the carbon crisis unless we look at it from an equity lens. Okay, that's really how we need to look at the world. And equity means making sure that the billion people that don't have access to power get access to power, but not by giving them the same old fuels and power resources that we went through, but by thinking about how we give them clean energy resources. It's not equity and it's not a clean energy unless it's a clean energy transition, because we're going to give them something, we're going to give people something that creates a flood or a catastrophe, and that's not equity. That's just playing games. We're going to pay for it either way. We're going to pay for it either by fixing the disaster or by making sure the disaster doesn't happen and paying a little bit more up front. You asked me how we play in that, and I think it is by providing products that are made that will not damage the environment that people are living in. But I don't want this to be about LanzaTech, because it's not. It's about technologies that can enable an equitable future that also can happen quickly, right? That this is the other problem, where we talk about this without the urgency that it needs. Anish, actually, you did a brilliant job talking about 2030. I have to tell you, we have to stop talking about 2050. You know, if what we're talking about is 2050, we're not going to get this done. And that's why, if you think about it from an equity lens, you think about how do we create an equal playing field for everybody without bringing the people that don't have the things that we all have in this room from the same resources as before.
This is an equity question. I love that. Final question, because I'm conscious we're up against time. Optimism. How optimistic are you about COP28 and about the prospects in a few weeks' time for the world moving forward? As you say, not focusing on 2050 and later dates, but focusing on the near term.
I wish you wouldn't use the word optimism. Simon. Okay, but so what is this COP? This is the stock taking. This is the last year of the stock taking. So what is it? It's a reality check, okay? Anybody who doesn't think this is a reality check, you know, I was at Paris, right? What did we commit to at Paris? 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees as an ambition. We're at 1.2 degrees and you see the catastrophes. So 1.5, I don't even want to think about what 1.5 is, much less 2 or 3. So I think we committed at Paris that we would bend the carbon curve. Okay, has anybody seen a bent carbon curve? I haven't even seen a flattened carbon curve. So this is really the year where we're going to have to look ourselves really hard in the mirror and say, what are we not doing? That's, I think, what this year represents. And I have optimism that we're smart enough to figure this out and to realize we're not making progress. But more importantly, I also believe we're smarter than the problem. We have to stop with the false choices. We don't ask ourselves the right questions, right? So I think this is the year where I hope we will all look in the mirror and say, it's time to act, it's time to get moving, and it's time to do it in a way that brings everybody along.
Well, I found that really inspirational in what you're doing, Jennifer, so thank you so much for sharing your stories this morning, and just like to ask everybody to show a big round of appreciation.
Yeah, I'm sure the photographers won't let you go, so they're just waiting for me to get out of the way. So please.
Hold up one of your products.
Okay.